Hi, and thanks for the organizers for inviting me to give this lecture. I don't know, I keep getting invited back, so I don't know if I have to come back for remedial academic skills or stuff, but it's either that or nobody else wants to come, but I enjoy coming, and thank you again for inviting me back. And I really like to do this talk, and I hope you guys are going to find this very helpful. Okay, so I just wanted to get a sense. How many of you guys out there are senior fellows? Ooh, a bunch. Okay, and then how many of you guys have left the nest and now are instructors or assistant professors? Probably about half and half, huh? Is that about right? Is that what you guys thought? Yeah, about half and half. Okay, great. And how many of you feel like you're being watched by your division chief really closely? Well, it's probably true, and you probably are, but it's because, as Barbara said, they want you to be they want you to be happy, they want you to be productive. And a lot of your division chiefs, right, had to write you letters of support to be here, so they really, want you to succeed. So what I really want to talk to you about this morning are the nuts and bolts about how to get promoted to associate professor and then eventually to full professor. So the timeline that I have in my head is 7 years to go from assistant to associate, which I think is about the average. And it might be a little bit shorter and maybe 1 year longer, but I think 7 years is probably appropriate. So let's first start with the things you should be doing in the span of your first 5 years, and then I'll share with you how what I did when I went about getting promoted to associate. Okay, so the first thing you need to know, which Marcia was just telling you about, is know the track and the requirements of that track. Because if you know what the percentages are supposed to be, now you can block in your mind what you need to be doing within your first 5 years. You should also select a career mentor, which we already heard about, and this person can be local or national. And what this person does is help you decide on the numerous things that you're going to be invited to do once you're faculty. So you're going to get invited to do reviews and book chapters. Some of these you should do, some of them you shouldn't, and it's going to take away time from what you really need to be doing in your first 5, and you need someone to kind of help you, say yes, thumbs up or thumbs down on whether you should invest your time in that. The next thing you should do is get funding. We talked about that. So when I got my first job, I had a KO8, and I was able to transfer my KO8 to my first job. But I went into the VA system, and in fact, I'm still in my first job 17 years later, but it's a good environment, good mentor. But KO8 is a salary support award. I lost my K because the VA paid my salary. So here I am in my new basic research lab with no support. So then I had to get a career development award through the VA. So that's what I did. And then after that, I was able to get a foundation award in my 3rd year after I moved. And I got my independent RO1 in my 4th year, and then flipping the side of that right over in the 5th year, I got my VA Merit Award, and then I was good to go. You also need to generate data, right, in order to apply for funding. And, of course, to apply for funding, you're going to have to publish papers. So, you're going to need data to publish your papers, too. So when I moved in July of 98. I did the first experiment in my lab in November of 98 because, of course, you had to hire people and then order supplies and chemicals. So here's the first gel that I did in my lab. You can see the date on the top. It was 11/10/98, and this is actually in my office, like on the pinup board. This was an agarose gel, and I was assessing RNA quality both here in patient tissues, which I had collected as part of an IRB protocol, and then I had some cell lines. And you can see that, there's a whole lot of degradation here in my patient samples, but I did much better in my cell lines. I'm showing you this now, and I'm just going to say some of you guys are going to be reviewing my grants in the future. I'm much better at RNA extraction, but I just wanted you to see this. And you guys are like, what is this picture, right? The mentors will understand that this is from the dark room and a Polaroid camera. Remember? Point, shoot, pull, dry. And then you take your picture. So nowadays it's all electronic, but anyway. So like I said, you need to publish papers. So I finished my first paper when I moved to my first job with data I generated during my fellowship. And then by year 2, I was able to put out a paper from my lab. I suggest that you avoid institutional committees at first. It's all about you and your research and your career, so I said no. I got on my first committee after my 3rd year, and the committee I got on was the VA IRB, which it's a little bit of a working committee, but I was able to write a really good IRB and get through the committee faster because I learned, what they wanted to see and how to do it. So it wasn't like at the VA you could be on a committee like, do we need another door in the hallway committee? So don't do that kind of committee, but do something, it's the VA, of course, right? But do something that's going to help you move along with your career. I would also consider national committees. So I was an abstract reviewer for the AGA within my first year, and then I was on an AGA committee, the Young Trainee and GI committee, which went away, but it's now back, so that's an opportunity for you guys to get involved. The other thing I also did is make sure you keep track of all your clinical and teaching activities. So you're going to get really busy, and you constantly have to update your CV. So if you don't have time and you're doing something, or you get an invitation, print it off, stick it in a folder, do something so you don't forget about it, and remember to constantly update your CV. And then, in fact, I too also attended the Academic Skills Workshop. I was here in 2001, and my mentor was Ray Du Bois. I actually remember that. So all of these items I just discussed with you should be ongoing simultaneously and continuously during your first 5 years. So now let's focus on a milestone point, which is going to be the end of year 3. So at the end of year 3, it's now time to test the waters. So what you should do is update your CV and then do a quick self-evaluation. So are you doing what you thought you would be doing? If not, is that a problem, or what you're doing is making you happy? If it is a problem, now would be the time to fix it. So you would need to talk to your division chief and say, hey, I'm not doing exactly what I thought I'd be doing. I'm spending too much time doing clinical. I need to spend more time in the lab. Now would be the time to talk with them and fix it. If you're happy with what you're doing, then how are you doing at it? Are you publishing papers? Are you getting your grants funded? Are you doing okay in what you're supposed to be doing? So if you think you're doing okay, then it would be time to set up a talk with your division chief and make sure that both of you guys are on the same page. Do they think that you're doing okay? How are you progressing? Are you on the right track? Just make sure that you guys are on the right track at year 3. So now let's look at the next milestone point, which would be the end of year 5. So at the end of year 5, it's now time to start getting serious. So once again, review those requirements of your track for promotion and make sure that you are progressing on your track, and ask yourself again, am I on the right track? I would say at the end of year 5, if you think you're on the wrong track, now would be the time to switch for the 7-year goal. So at UT Southwestern, if you have to switch tracks, you have to be on your new track for at least a year before you can be considered going up for promotion. So every institution is going to be different. So if you have to switch, make sure you know that time frame in order to switch. And if you think all is well, now again would be the time to talk to your division chief and make sure that both of you guys are still on the same page. So if you think you're ready for promotion and you talk to your division chief and you get the sense from them that there's a little bit of resistance on the part of your chief, there might be a few things to keep in mind about why you might be feeling that way. So your division chief doesn't want to put you up for promotion if they think that you're going to be shot down. So it'll look bad for the proposer if you go up to the big committee and they don't agree with the promotion. It looks bad for your division chief and also for your chief of medicine or whatever division you're in. And it's also not good for you because you're going to feel really horrible if you go up and they turn you down. So there also may be issues going on within your division about the timing of your promotion. So for example, if you're ready to go up and there's another faculty member who's been there a lot longer who's also ready to go up, and your CV looks way better than theirs, your division chief might not want to put you up at the same time. And if you do sense resistance from the part of your chief, the next question would be, to really speak with them honestly and establish firm goals for what you need to do to be ready. Do you need additional papers? Do you need funding? Do you need to have more national recognition, go out and give talks? That kind of stuff. So now you're ready for promotion. You talk with your division chief agrees. Now what do? Time to check for some deadlines. Your division and or department may have internal committees that have a certain deadline where they pre-review your promotion packet. That deadline is going to be different than if you go to the website for your big P&T committee. So keep that in mind. Also, make sure you line up your references and ask individuals, I know this sounds really silly to say, but ask individuals who you know are familiar with what you've done, and then ask them if they're willing to give you a strong reference. Because a lukewarm reference isn't going to help you, so just make sure that they're willing and know enough about you to give a strong reference. At UT Southwestern, in fact, we don't do letters. So if you write letters, you would like somebody from UT because there's no letters involved, but you get called. So someone from the promotions committee is going to call because you can get subtle things out of people that you can't get through letters. So keep that in mind when you're looking at it, and actually see if your institution does letters or phone calls. So here's the general components of a promotion packet, and they're going to vary from institution to institution, but in general, it's going to have these similar elements. And what I'm going to do is go through each component with you guys individually, but it's going to include a department chair's letter, your CV, a teaching portfolio, bibliography, grant support, and then as well as personal references. So let me start with the department chair's letter. So this letter is going to serve as your introduction to the promotions committee. And key elements of the letter are likely going to include the percentage of time that you spend in teaching, research, and clinical service. So of course these percentages are going to vary depending on the track you're on, like you heard from Marcia. But what this does is it sets up in the mind of the committee that's looking at your application what you should have accomplished in each of these areas depending on the percentage of time you're supposed to be dedicated to each of these areas. There's also going to be a summary of comments regarding your teaching and evaluation from students, residents, and fellows. And your departmental office should have records of these. And now that at UT we have evaluations that are all done online now, I think there's a way that you can pull down and see, what your trainees have said about your teaching ability. This letter is also probably going to state how you contribute to your department in a unique way compared with others in a similar area. And my tip here for this is that you might want to prepare a summary of your accomplishments in each of these areas. So if you have clinical teaching, teaching, research, and clinical service, a summary of what you've accomplished in each area to give to your department chair. That way, you don't want your department chair just like digging through your CV, but you want to kind of brief them on what you've done. And then the other tip here is you may want to set up a meeting with your department chair before he or she writes that letter, again, just to kind of brief them on what you've done. Okay, now let's look at your CV. I just can't emphasize enough to make sure your CV is up to date. And check to see if your institution has a particular format. When I first went to UT, they did not have a particular format. It recently changed within the last 5 years. So just, again, make sure you're formatted for your institution. Get a copy of a successful colleague's CV if they're willing to share it with you, so you can use it to kind of see how to set up that format. Everything you do counts, and this should be reflected on your CV. And you may have to be creative. So let me show you. So when I first went to UT, they assigned a faculty to mentor a house staff. And you would meet with the house staff every 6 months, and then you would write up a letter. It would go into the department chair. And it was a very simple task, but it was service to my university. There was no title for this thing. It was what you're expected to do. So on my CV, I just made it up. Under my mentoring activities, medical resident, house staff, faculty mentorship program. And then I wrote down the name of the people that I mentored. And I gave myself credit for this activity that I did for the institution. Okay, let's talk about your teaching portfolio. This is going to include any kind of teaching you do. So this would be medical school didactic lectures. Also, student rotations. So if you've got undergraduate medical students or students rotating with you, and not only is this in the lab, but if you're doing clinical teaching and you've got students rotating with you. Sometimes you have students from other institutions who are doing observerships. That stuff all counts. Postdoctoral trainees, again, on clinical rotations as well as research rotations for residents, fellows, and faculty. What I always did is I always made sure I wrote down the name. That way people didn't think I was making it up, but I would have this person and say their name. There's also non-clinical postdoctoral trainees, Postgraduate education. So if you're giving GI grand rounds, make sure you write that down, the title, where you were giving it. Even if it's local, write that down. That still counts. And then educational leadership. I learned this by going to those sessions that your promotion committee sometimes will put on at your institution. And I gleaned from that that educational leadership seemed to be a big ticket item. So I actually made a separate category and said, educational leadership, and then wrote what I did. So if you're putting together a course syllabus, if you're putting together a weekend program or a CME conference, that would be educational leadership. How about service? And when I'm talking here about service, this is going to be for clinical service. So service would include service to the medical school. So if you're interviewing interns, fellow applicants, mentoring house staff, these activities provide a valuable service to your university, so make sure you put those down. Oh, what's going on? Oh, yes, that's right. Clinical practice. So if you're on medicine wards, GI wards, clinic, endoscopy lab, put this all down. And when I did this, I actually put down the number of hours, the number of consults, the number of procedures, the number of patients seen in clinic. They wanted that kind of detail. So just have a sense on what, so again, if you have a lot of clinical duties, you're going to be measured on your productivity. So at the VA at the time, they didn't have, RVUs. Now we have RVUs at the VA. But again, so I wrote down like the number of patients seen every time I was in clinic. If you're on clinical committees, so if you're on the IRB, if you're on fellowship committees, clinical conferences, how many clinical conferences do you go to a week? What is the time commitment for those conferences? What they're about? Clinical leadership. Are you chair of a clinical committee? Are you a faculty mentor for a fellows talk? Do you run a GI Med-Surg case conference every Friday morning? That kind of activity. And then my tip here, again, is local leadership activities are an important component of promotion from assistant to associate. National and international comes into play for professor, and if you have that to go to associate, that's good. But they are going to want to see kind of local leadership activities. Now let's look what would go into your bibliography, and then how this gets reviewed and perceived by the committee. So included usually are your peer-reviewed original articles, followed by book chapters, invited reviews, and then at UT they also wanted abstracts. I don't think this pertains anymore, but there was a time when you can submit an abstract, and if it wasn't presented at the meeting selected for presentation, it actually still got published. Gastro used to do this years ago. Now I don't think they're doing that anymore, but I had this, and so I would always star ones that were presented at national meetings. So my tip for this too is that not all papers are weighted equally. So example, if you have a paper in science, that'll be viewed more favorably than if you have a paper in a throwaway journal. Right? Position counts. Right? So first and last authorship would count more because that position reflects the strength of your intellectual contribution to that project. So first and last would count more. And then more is not necessarily better. So they're going to look at both the quality as well as the quantity, and that's going to be weighted by the committee. There's also your grant support for you to list, and be sure to include all types of grants. So that would be grants from the NIH, as well as the VA, the AGA, ASCG, ACG, ASGE, industry, and then other foundation grants that you might have received. Again, this is where I go back to the, you're applying for a grant or you got a grant and you might not have put it on your CV. Just make sure you keep a record or something in a folder so you can update and make sure all that's going to be reflected. And at least at UT, they wanted current grant support and past grant support. So again, I had to go back. So when I got my F32 as a fellow, I put that on there. But if you didn't keep up your CV, you might have forgotten about the grant you got when you were a fellow at the time you're going to go for associate. So really keep that in mind. Okay, Dr. Linder brought this up, and he talked about institutional citizenship. And so this is an informal activity that is reviewed by promotions committees. And in fact, when you do phone calls, this is the kind of stuff that comes out on a phone call that's not going to be in letters. So this is pretty important. So what this means is it's not just your participation on an institutional committee, but rather whether or not you're a team player. So for example, do you participate in teaching activities when asked to give a talk to the medical students? And do you help with coverage when a colleague is sick? So being known as the guy or gal who helps out in a pinch is going to go a long way. And citizenship won't get you to the promotions committee, but it certainly can get you turned down. And I've seen this happen at UT a couple of times. You get nailed if you're not a good citizen. But remember, you can't say yes to everything. So you need to strike a balance. So this is where the advice of your career mentor can likely come in handy. So in general, if you're... I love that slide. Sometimes I feel like that, you know. But anyway, especially, you know, anyway. So in general, if you're asked by your division chief or your chair of medicine, right, Dr. Crothers, it's always good to say yes. And if you do turn something down, do so graciously. So the no, I'm too busy response all the time is not going to fly. So try not to do that. I mean, if you really are busy, just, I got this going on, I'm really busy. But, you know, take that into account when you're trying to manage your time. Okay, so some key points to take home. Once again, keep your CV updated so you don't let anything drop off and forget about anything. Know the expectations of your track right from the start. So the percent of time you're expected to be involved in clinical activities, research, and teaching, and make sure that you and your institution are both on the same page. If you're not doing what you thought you would be doing, talk to your division chief and then fix it early. And select a career mentor to help keep you on track. And this is, like I said, somebody to run stuff by to make sure if it's worthwhile to say yes or to say no. If you're going to say no, and do it graciously. And if you have to change tracks, know the time frames that you can stay on track to get promoted in 7 years. So as someone who went through this process twice, it can be really painful putting together the packet, but in the end, it is worth it. And I just want to show you like my mentor team. So this was my mentor when I was a house staff, who then became my division chief and is now my scientific partner. And in fact, this is our 24th year together. I know, I'm waiting to see what the 25th, isn't that some kind of major anniversary thing? Then I get a little still, yeah, anyway. I got promoted to professor in 2011. These are two of my mentees. Some of you guys know them, Carrie Dunbar and Annie Fagans. They got promoted to associate professor last year. Currently, this is Adair Chang. She's an assistant professor of pediatric gastroenterology, hopefully to be promoted maybe next year. And Joanne, I'm sorry, this is just local Dallas. And then there's Joanne out there who's also an assistant professor. And so we're getting her teed up, ready to go, hopefully in Colorado. So thank you very much.